Let's discuss the second house and the 10th house and what we can interpret if the two of those combine. How would you have two houses combine? Well, usually it's through the lords, but there's another way. Through the lords, it would be, for example, if the second lord goes to the 10th house, or the 10th lord goes to the second house, or if the 10th and the second lords conjoin somewhere, or if they mutually aspect each other. The other way that I was talking about is if you could assess the relative influence of each house, and then if you would have these two houses in sequence. In other words, the 10th house being the most influential in your chart and the second being the next most, or vice versa. Or even if they're on both ends of the spectrum, the 10th is the most influential and the second is the least, or the second is the most influential and the 10th is the least, then you're going to get interplay between the second and 10th house, which is going to have very similar effects to as if the second lord were in the 10th house, etc. Now, how would you figure out which houses are the most prominent in your chart? That takes a lot of work. If you want to avail yourself of the work that I offer on that, you can go to victorcara.com at /, and then an H, and you'll go to the report that I offer, which, among other things, calculates your house prominence and gives you a DNA code of what sequence the house prominences are in. So please avail yourself of that if it interests you. And let's go ahead, proceed with the video, and explain what the second house represents and what the 10th house represents, and then talk about what we can interpret from their combinations. So the second house is the area of the sky that's below the eastern horizon. So all of its symbolism derives from the fact that it's below the east, or in other words, it's the support of the east. So since the east is the place where things begin, it's the sunrise. The things begin and become visible there. So the second house is pro-beginning and pro-visibility. In other words, the second house is really summarized by the simple word foundation. Literally, it is the foundation of the eastern horizon, and the word foundation signifies everything the second house symbolizes. So one thing about foundations is they provide stability to the structure. So you'll notice a native's stability or instability by the condition of their second house. And the things which are foundational to us are signified by the second house. For example, our family. That's the foundation that we grew up with. That's signified by the second house. And not just blood family, but the people that support us like a foundation. So friends as well, supporters as well. Another thing which is our foundation is the wealth that we can draw from. So the second house signifies that type of wealth. Another thing which is foundational to us is the health or the condition of our body. So the second house signifies health and the way that we eat, and then the way that we process nutrition, etc. On the other hand, because the second house is pro-visibility, it has an impact on knowledge, because knowledge makes things knowable or visible. Right? So the second house signifies having knowledge of things, not feeling that things are invisible or unknowable. And the second house implies a realistic bent, so it shows a native's sense of realism or practicality. That's the second house. The 10th house is actually the area of sky, literally the area of sky that's directly above our heads. And that's the basis for everything that the 10th house symbolizes. So what is the character of the open sky above our head? Well, the first thing is that it's very, very visible. And the second thing is that it is not grounded. It's the opposite of grounded. It's very windy. So on the theme of the 10th house being the visible sky, the very visible sky, it symbolizes the extroverse. In other words, the visible part of our universe, the visible part of our life. And so this is the house to look at for anything pertaining to your public affairs, your public world, and how you operate in society. This is why people call the 10th house the house of career. Because what is a career? A career is the way that we operate in society, the role that we play in the world. The success of the career will confer or deny status, social status, and fame. Fame is recognition, right? So how visible you are is how famous you are, how well recognized you are. That's all in the 10th house. The amount of status that you have confers influence, your ability to influence or command or have authority. So the 10th house signifies influence, authority figures, your personal amount of authority that you have, and hence it's also the archetype, the classical archetype of the father figure. On the other hand, the 10th house is the place of wind, right? It's not grounded. It's the opposite of grounded, so it's windy. So the 10th house is not a place for staying still. The 10th house favors moving around. It's a house of movement. It's favorable to travel. It's not a place of stability because it's not grounded. In fact, it's a house of instability, and things will not grow or be fertile here. Rather, they'll be spent or evaporated here. Now that we understand what the second house signifies and what the 10th house signifies, we can talk in a more intelligent way, and actually with a better sense of intuition about what we should expect or interpret from combinations of the second and the 10th house. So one thing that you'll get from such combinations is that the pro-visibility of the second house will resonate well with the visible nature of the 10th house. And since this is a resonant harmony, it's going to produce good effects. So it will impact the things that are in the columns in these charts about visibility. So for example, we will expect career success. So therefore we'll also expect that the person has some palpable amount of recognition or fame or status. And also the side effect of career is usually good income. Another thing is learning has to do with visibility. So we expect a positive influence on learning if the second and 10th are interacting. And specifically, it will have to do with the 10th house favoring an authority figure. So the type of person or trait that you expect here is like an educated authority or an authority on a particular subject. And as far as personality trait, the extroversive nature of the 10th house is one of the things that's in the visibility column, right? So this is going to work pretty well when the second and 10th combine. So expect a person to be outgoing, an ability to project outward, and it also comes along with a tendency to project outward, or like a tendency to look outward. It's not an introversive placement. It's the opposite. It makes a person a bit materialish, you can say, like a bit outward looking in how they evaluate happiness or success or goals. Another thing to expect is that the familyness of the second house will resonate well with the fatheriness of the 10th house. So specifically here, you expect the person to get good fatherly figures. So that could mean a good father, literally, and it can also mean that father-type figures in society tend to support you. So this person tends to get support from authorities rather than conflict with authorities. Now, here I'll bring up a point which does come up from time to time as we go through these houses and their combinations, is that things going one way is not always the same as things going the other way. So for example, the second lord going into the 10th house is not quite the same as the 10th lord going into the second house. And if you're doing a house sequence, like a DNA code from the report that I offer, having a 10 followed by a 2 is not necessarily the same as having a 2 followed by a 10. It's not always the case with all the houses, but with many houses it is. And it is here, in this particular case with the fathers in the family, where there's something interesting that comes up if it's going in a particular direction. If you have the second lord going into the 10th house, which is similar to having 10th house being supported or followed by the second, then what you're doing is putting the family indicator into an unstable place or a travel-y place. So although you expect that the fatheriness of the 10th house will support the familyness of the second house, also the traveliness of the 10th house doesn't really go well with the hominess of the second house. And it's okay if the traveliness is going into the home, 10th lord going to the second house, or second house supported by the 10th house. But it's less enjoyable if the second lord is going into the 10th, or the 10th is supported by the second. What would you expect in that case? A kind of a person that doesn't get a lot of chance to spend time at home. So although they're good with father figures, they may be a good father figure, supporter for their family, they're probably not in a lot of contact with their family because they're out working or out traveling a lot. And this leads us to discuss the third thing, which I believe is very important to discuss about how the second and 10th interact. The second house is stability, and that is going to clash with the instability of the 10th house. So you have a person that doesn't really settle. They don't settle down. They don't root very well. And it also affects their goal-pursuing patterns, where the person could be well advised to be more patient and stay at something for longer before they give up and move on to the next place. So that wraps it up on the most important things to understand about the second house, about the 10th house, and about how they interact. If you like this video, please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe so you can, and click the notifications button so you can see the rest of the videos that I do that are very similar to this. Next one we'll do is 2nd and 11th. So, and also if you want to get that assessment of your houses via my report, let me just remind you that the URL for that is vicdicara.com/H. Thank you very much. See you again soon for the next video.